Hello and welcome to the i3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Julie Grahame. Thank you for coming out for the best possible distraction tonight, fabulous photography. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much, Daniel Handal, for speaking this evening. Daniel is a Honduran-born artist based here in New York City. His graphic work explores issues of gender, sexuality, identity, and representation with his superb signature color palette. Daniel's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including at the New Mexico Museum of Art in Santa Fe, the Powerhouse Arena here in New York City, the Australian Centre for Photography in Sydney, and Mark II in London. His work has been covered in publications including the Huffington Post, Slate, and Hyperallergic. Daniel has participated in several residencies in New York, and he currently serves on the board of directors of the Baxter Street at the Camera Club of New York. Daniel is represented by Clamp in New York, which is where I was first introduced to his beautiful work. Hi, Brain. So please get comfortable, switch your phone off, and give yourself over to this short escape.
Thank you, Julie, for that introduction, and thank you very much for including me in this lecture series. It's, as an artist, when you make your work, you start by making the work and you think, oh, this is exciting. You're working out of curiosity, and then you hope that other people get to see the work. But for me to be here to be able to explain to you my work, it's an honor and a really special opportunity. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Honduras, and I came to the United States to study. So I have some examples of older work, but I won't be talking about these projects, but I wanted to show them as an example of how my work has progressed. So a little bit about my background. So I came to the US and I studied engineering. Actually, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't really understand that you could pursue a career in the arts. It's not something that I knew was possible. So I was good at math, and I got an engineering degree. I worked as an engineer for a year, and I just really was not the right match for me. But I knew that I wanted to live in New York. I moved to New York, and I pursued some freelance work. I was working temp agencies, and that introduced me to graphic design. And so I started learning digital skills. I remember I didn't have a lot of money, actually, so I'd go to Barnes & Noble on 6th Avenue, and I would just read about Photoshop and Quark Express. If you don't know, it's like a version of InDesign. But basically, like, I taught myself how to do graphic design, and then I lived in New York, and I didn't have a studio. I didn't really have training in photography, so Polaroid was a way to I learned about f-stops and aperture, and then slowly I started developing projects, and that's how I slowly became more technically capable, and little by little my projects started taking shape and form. So some of these examples, they're linked to environmental portraiture and social documentary type work, but it has evolved. And later, when I'm done with the projects that I wanted to focus on tonight, maybe you can ask me about how I moved from those types of projects to the projects that I work on today. These projects, you can see that they all look different, and I used to feel a little bit insecure about it, to be honest with you. I felt like, I should be more consistent about the work that I do, and they should all kind of have this sort of like similar look and feel. Like, I don't want them to look like they're done by different artists. But then I kind of like thought to myself, but this is who I am. And it's like a really important lesson to learn for myself. And I think that one of the things that I hope I can do tonight is not just offer a bit of a distraction, because I know we all have a lot in our minds tonight, but also I hope it's helpful and inspiring. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, so as I show you my projects, I want you to consider that what I do is that in all my projects have something in similar. So like what I do is I take something in my personal life and then something that I see in history, and then I kind of bring them together to create a body of work. And what I feel is important is that I'm satisfying a little bit of my own curiosity, and I'm following my gut and my inspiration. But I'm also making work that I feel is somewhat relevant to not just myself, but other people. And also, I want my work to be collected. So I'm thinking about all those things. So it's not just for myself, but hopefully to share with other people as well. So the first project that I wanted to share with you guys is titled Cranach Nudes, and I worked on it 2012, 2014. And I was mentioning to you guys earlier, so like what I do is I take inspiration from things I see in culture. And this painting, before I worked on the project, what happened was I was in Rome, and I love Rome. It's just such an incredible city. I think it's hands down one of my favorite cities in the world. Like, and it may be because I was raised Catholic. I'm not really sure. But like, the thing is that you walk through Rome, the streets of Rome, and well, the food is incredible. But like, you walk through the streets of Rome, and then you're like in antiquity, and then you're in the modern world, and you go to these churches, and they have these Caravaggios, and you think to yourself, like, what the? Like, it's incredible. And there are just people praying and putting little coins so that, you know, they get illuminated, so you get to see it for like 30 seconds, and you just like have to put another coin. But like I love that experience. And Galleria Borghese had, an exhibition on Lucas Cranach the Elder. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with these paintings, but him in his studio made many versions of this painting. And it's titled Venus with Cupid Stealing Honey. And what they all have in common is there's a poem on the, I don't know if you can see it, but it's on the top portion of the paintings. And it's telling a story. And what's happening here is that Cupid is stealing honey from the bees. And the bees are stinging him. And he's complaining to his mother Venus that it hurts. And she's explaining to him that it's similar to the pain that he inflicts with his arrow. And so it's a moral to the story. So basically what it's saying that transitory pleasures lead to pain. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that, you know, but I think that what really caught my imagination is that painters use classical mythology and religious themes to make nudity socially acceptable. So it got me thinking about nudity, and I wanted to work on a project that was a reinterpretation of these paintings, but in a contemporary setting. So this is actually my bedroom apartment. In the walls, I painted them this color to sort of kind of make a reference to what I saw in the paintings that I felt there was the earthy color palette. And one of the things that I was interested was that I was thinking a lot about how I do a lot of I do a lot of work in the beauty industry as a designer. So I look at a lot of concepts when art directors are coming up with their ideas for products or ads, and it's interesting because I see how a lot of art directors, and I think artists do it too to an extent, but like we take inspiration from other things that we see in culture, whether it's painting and movies and all these other things. And I was thinking how there's a connection between photography and painting, and then painting and sculpture, and it can all sort of link back to antiquity. So it's like a lineage of Western culture. So one of the things that I do in my work is that I besides me trying to pursue a certain kind of curiosity or something that I think is beautiful, is that I also want to be better at becoming a I want to become a better photographer. And so I give myself these sort of challenges. And this sculpture was something that I was also looking at. And the hands in particular was something that made me really think about hands and how I use them in my composition to make beautiful photographs. Another thing that I do in my work is that they're all separate artworks, but I think of them working together also. So like I think that one photograph is beautiful, but then when you start adding a second one to make a diptych, or add a third one for a triptych, or groups of four, or then it starts to become, it kind of adds to the hanging and installation, and it creates this kind of like choreography that I really love. And then the other thing that I wanted to share with you guys is how I was telling you that I kind of take something that has to do, is happening in my life, and then something that I see in culture. And something that was happening in my life is I was in a relationship, and I wanted it to work, but it just wasn't the right match for me, and I didn't really understand that at the time. But looking back at these photographs, I realized that one of the things that I was trying to do is understand what love is supposed to feel like, and that's like an important thing in my practice, because I feel that like just really paying attention to what my heart is telling me, it's important. And I think as an artist, it's really critical to sort of just follow your gut feeling and see where that takes you. And this is what the work looks like on the gallery wall. So the next project that I want to share with you guys is titled Pajaritos, and I worked on it from 2016 to 2018. I can do this. So similar to the previous project, I am also looking at a painting that is a source of inspiration. And this is by Paolo Veronese. It's titled Temptation of St. Anthony. And I came across it at the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, and I wasn't familiar with the painting, but when I saw it, like, it's hard to describe, like it just, like, I think I saw it from afar, and I would just gravitate towards the painting, because like not just because it's a beautiful painting, but because I recognized exactly what the painting was about. Because what's happening here is that there's a demon, a handsome demon clubbing St. Anthony. He's about to hit him. But the devil is disguised as a woman. And if you can look at this detail, I don't know if you can tell, but I've zoomed into it on the right. But her hands resemble talons. And so what this implies is that you can always recognize temptation by its sharp claw. And what I was thinking at the time when I saw the painting is that it reminded me of what it was like growing up gay, and fighting these feelings and these thoughts that I was told were wrong and ugly and sinful. And it took a really long time to work through those feelings, and longer than I wish it had. But like I wanted to work on a project that had to do with temptation, but like transform it into something different, something that spoke to my experience and how I had evolved over the years. And so I started thinking about the talents of a bird, and I didn't want to photograph that was too straightforward. So it got me thinking about all these other things in queer culture, like burlesque or art or religious iconography, fashion, drag, all these things that I just love and that I relate to, and they're part of my community and queer culture. And then I'm thinking is that how can I bring all these ideas and produce an image that it's infused with all these things. So in a sense, it's not So when you look at the image on the right, you're not immediately thinking to yourself, oh, that must be based on that painting by Pablo Veronese. But like it's kind of like underneath the surface, kind of like a perfume or like a meal, and you can taste the ingredients, and you're kind of trying to decipher, but they're there. And so I wanted to tell you all a little bit about the title of the project is Pajaritos. And Pajaritos is the diminutive for pájaro, and pájaro means bird in Spanish. And it's also a derogative term for gay men. And it's awful and demeaning and dismissive and all these other things. But what I'm doing is that I'm using the diminutive to make it more endearing. And because I want to sort of take this ugly feeling and transform it into something beautiful, then I'm taking the word, changing it, and then using the bird and the color to celebrate diversity, femininity, and queer culture. And so one thing that I wanted to mention is that working on the project was like really quite incredible, because it was actually the beginning of my working relationship with Brian, which was like a dream come true for me to be able to partner with him and also show my work to the world, but also because the project has so much to do with something that I carry in my heart, like everywhere I go. And so to be able to share with the world is so special to me. And people ask me all the time how I make the pictures, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how I make them. Off the bat, I wanted to mention that they're live birds, they're not taxidermy. And if you don't know what taxidermy is a way to preserve the bird so you can study or display it. And I did think about that at the beginning. I was like, oh, maybe, because I wanted the bird to stay still, and how am I going to do it? And then I know if there's a cage, and I have all these like things in the foreground, and I wanted like a really clean picture. And it just, the taxidermy that I saw online, maybe I wasn't looking in the right places, but like, the wings were a little banged up, a little dusty, and I was like, there's no way. Like, I want the work to be about beauty. And so, thankfully, I have a couple of friends of mine who are vets, and they were able to connect me with the right people. And that's really the thing about photography, right? Like, you try to figure out what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it. You talk to some friends or some people who may know more about one particular thing, and they were able to connect me with people who had canaries and finches, which is what I'm exclusively photographing. And so what I do is, because it would be very difficult for me to get them to come to my studio with their birds, like I figured I had to go to them. And so the way I resolved it, which is, it's exciting, like you have a project, you have an idea, how do you do it, right? So the way I go about doing this is that in product photography, you have these things called light boxes. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but what they are is that these like nylon fabric boxes, and they have little zippers. And what happens is that you can like kind of like peek inside, and you put your lens, and you can like take the photograph. But in this case, it also functions as a cage. So the birds don't fly. Well, I mean, they may want to try to fly away, but they're really inside this area that I'm using to photograph. And what's happening too is that I have two strobes, and then here it's stronger, and then on the right it's a little softer. And so it's freezing the motion of the bird, because the bird is never still. So I'm taking a few pictures, and it's a wooden plank with a perch, and then I bring all this color paper with a hole ready so that I can put it, tape it, and then select the bird that I think will go with the color. And it's a mess. Like there's like tape and a little bit of poop here and there. And so like it's really kind of chaotic, to be honest with you, but like also quite incredible to sort of like figure out how do you go about doing this. And then you get these pictures and you think to yourself like, wow, that like I got this beautiful image that you don't normally see, because if you look at a bird, it's usually in a cage or in the wild, not behind this fabulous fuchsia color. And so so it was exciting to kind of problem solve. And so one of the things that I was thinking about when I was working on the project is that I was like, well, how many do I make? And how do I figure this out? And so I give myself some parameters, right? So I figure out, okay, well, I feel like I'm just gonna make it tons of pastels because I feel like that's what I shouldn't do. I go to galleries and I feel like sometimes contemporary work can be serious, and I thought, well, let me work on something that's not. It's got a little bit of humor, it's pretty, it's queer, And so a lot of my titles are based on the colors that I give them, and it has references that I see in culture. And so here I'm showing you how the work is actually made. So because I want to be extra, I paint the frames also the same exact color of the background, which is what, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I think it is interesting since I'm speaking to a lot of photographers. I'm assuming that I have to color correct to match the color of the frame of the paint, and then the pigment print is on paper, and then the paint is on wood, and so the way light reflects is completely different. So even though you're thinking you're gonna get a match, then you put a varnish, and that shifts the color. And so it's really quite exciting to be well, it's a little magenta, so I'm gonna add green, and you go through that really traditional process of color correcting in a way that was, I felt really traditional. Then the work is not traditional at all. So that's kind of exciting. And I think it's important to mention too that although the work has really personal meaning to me, I do want the work to be open to interpretation. So there's ambiguity a little bit. So it's not like I said, you're not going to look at this and say, oh wow, right, I totally see the transformation from temptation to celebrating queer life. It's just, but you can now that I've told you, right? I do want the work to be open to interpretation, to have different readings. And the great thing about birds is that it can symbolize a lot of things. It can symbolize freedom, for example, because of their ability to fly. But canaries and finches, they're never fully domesticated. And so you keep them in cages because they will fly away. So in a sense, they also represent lack of freedom, which is the exact opposite. And so one thing that I wanted to talk about is these two colors, because the work is so much about color, right? And queerness and femininity and by definition masculinity as well, is that we are taught that blue is a masculine color and pink is a feminine color. How do people make these decisions? But there are reasons. I'm not exactly sure this particular reason, but it wasn't always the case. Actually, is the opposite, because blue was a very expensive pigment, and so at the time it was only reserved for the most important commissions, and so the Virgin Mary was painted with the blue robe, and so it was considered a feminine color. And soldiers wore red uniforms that would fade to pink. And so it was considered a feminine color. And then somewhere along the lines, it got switched. Another thing that I thought might be interesting you guys to know is that you might be wondering well, how did he decide to print the bird that particular size, right? And so I have to use some logic, but there are two scale, so it's the size of the actual bird in real life. And the way I do that is that I don't actually measure the bird, but I know the diameter of the perch is 1/2 inch, and so I print 1/2 inch diameter, and then the bird is to scale. Um, birds can symbolize love and marriage as well. And I did want to stop here and talk to you a little bit about, like I was mentioning to you guys on my previous project, although they're all separate works, I think of how they work together as diptychs and triptychs and groups. And I do think about this ahead of time. Like I think to myself, how amazing it would be to just have like a yellow picture. And would it be just so much more amazing if you put a pink one next to it with a yellow center? Like how beautiful that composition would be. And a lot of the work is thought through in that way so that the colors work well together. And then I think of like the direction of the bird so that, for example, you could have something like this where although the birds are facing one direction, their gaze is looking in a certain way, and then there's more central bird in the middle. And then it creates a great triptych that I feel makes it fun for me and also fun for a curator or a collector. So this is the work in the gallery. The next project I want to share with you all is titled Final Girls. And I worked on it in 2019, 2020. But I've been thinking about this for a long time. I just wasn't sure how I was going to do it. And for some of you who don't know, Final Girls it's a film trope. And it's used in horror and sci-fi. And it's the female character in horror who is the sole survivor and the narrator of the story. So not only does she survive, but she also conquers her oppressor. And I came across this one project at an art fair, and the gallery titled it Type 42, which is Polaroid material, but we don't know who took these pictures, and there's actually no information about it. But like I think it was taken. They were taken by a gay man, and I could be wrong about this, but like that's my reading of it. And for the purpose of my project, I think I'm conveniently going to assume that that's correct. And so, if you look at the top left corner, it says "Fame is the name of the game." So the pictures are female actresses, but they are idolizing celebrity culture, which I feel it's an expression of queer fandom. And Warhol does something very similar. Like he'll take source images and create iconic paintings from it. So I wanted to work on a project that continued on that conversation between these two artists. And so I was thinking a lot about the movies that I grew up with. And I'm not a big horror movie fan, but I mean, some of them I do love. But it's the movies that I grew up with, and then in my research, because what I'm doing is I have parameters to make the work, you know. So I'm working with particular decades, and I'm working with horror, and the parameter is the final girl trope, right? So these actresses that are playing these particular roles, that creates a guide for me to build on this idea. And one of the things that I learned is that cultural critics and film scholars tell us that monster movies mirror the social anxieties of our time. And so similar to my previous project I was showing you, like I take these ideas and then there's other things that inform the work. In this case, minimalism and color and abstraction to create a body of work. And as I was preparing to work on the project, I was thinking about the 2016 presidential election and the years that followed. Got me thinking about female leadership. And the thing is that I think we could consider final girls a symbol of our own battles. And they inspire us to believe that no matter how difficult, we are able to overcome great challenges. And so I also create a color palette, and in this case I'm not randomly making the colors. What I'm doing is I'm doing research on these particular colors and the hues and the pigments, and trying to understand like when they were discovered or created or manufactured, and referencing those colors which have historical context. And there's this really incredible painting that I use as a reference. It's by Barnett Newman, and it's titled "Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue?" #3. I don't know if you can tell, but like there's like a blue line, a little yellow line, but it's mostly this vivid red. And the thing is that I know we've all heard like this. There's like a bit of like sometimes comments like, oh, abstract expressionism. It's like, oh, my 12-year-old could make that, you know? And I think that there's a sense of like easily sort of dismissing something you don't understand. And I wanted to understand it myself. And so I look at a lot of abstract expressionism and color and minimalism and conceptual works. And then this particular painting is interesting because there is someone who was so angry at this painting that he slashed it, entered the museum and slashed it, like destroyed it. And so because I'm using horror and slasher movies, I thought it was a funny thing to kind of include. But also, if you consider the title, "Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue?" it's actually a reference to a Edward Albee play titled "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?" which is a reference to a Disney song, "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?" So like I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, great. So like I'm gonna make a work of art that's making reference to a painting, that's making reference to a play, that's making reference to a song, a little meta, yes, but I want to have that association because I want to be part of this conversation. And I look at colors, and for example, the fact that this World War II British combat boat is painted pink is like fantastic. But like it was actually painted pink because it's thought that it would be a camouflage. And so I use that color as a reference to make one of the images. And because I'm thinking about, the work is about color to a great extent, I'm also thinking about color palettes and color schemes. And so, for example, these are different analogous colors. And so I think about how the work can hang together like this. And because I'm thinking about color and slasher movies, I'm thinking some of them should also glow in the dark. I mean, like how many opportunities does one have to make artwork that glows in the dark? I mean, you had to do it, right? And so triadic color scheme, color combination would look like this. Complementary color combination might look like this. And this is what the work looks like on the gallery wall. And sometimes I put the work closely together so there's no gap between them, and I think it creates a beautiful combination. It turns that into like one, which I think is wonderful, continuation of color. So the next project I wanted to share with you all is titled Engaños. And I'll show you a little bit about how they're made, but like I want to tell you a little bit about, the title is Engaños, which it means deceptions and illusions. And so in my project, I'm exploring themes of truth and authenticity. And unlike my other projects where I'm referencing a painting, I'm referencing this novel. And there's one chapter, I read it many, many years ago, and there's this one chapter that specifically talks about flowers. And the main character, what happens is that he's a bit eccentric, and but he's talking about all these different flowers that he loves, like, and this flower is more beautiful than this flower, and he collects these beautiful flowers, and he's telling you which ones are more beautiful than others. But then he gets bored with that, and then he starts collecting these artificial flowers that are made of paper and silk. And so then he describes how meticulous they're made and how beautiful they are. They're more beautiful than anything you can see in nature. And then he gets bored with that obsession, and then he decides to start collecting flowers and tropical plants that he finds in nature that look like the artificial plants. So there's this shift from nature to artificial to nature to artificial that I think is something like really interesting, and this is a theme that I explored with Pajaritos as well, because it has to do with this idea that authenticity is linked to beauty. And also because we're living in a world in which truth is questioned, I thought that it would be something that I wanted to revisit in my work. So I know when you see it from the front, it's a little hard to describe. So I have these videos that show you how they're made. And so we print them on aluminum. And then the aluminum is mounted inside a museum box that's made out of wood. But I keep the detail of the corrugated material. So like when you look at it from the front, it looks like there's like 3, 4, 5 inches of depth in each picture. But in fact, you can see that it's really only 1.5 inches. So it's an optical illusion. And so similar to my other projects is, and I create these diagrams actually, like in part because I have a really hard time writing artist statements. But I didn't make these, and then it kind of keeps me focused. But also it helps me understand, okay, what is it that I'm trying to do, and why is it that these things speak to each other? And there was this one particular thing that it was really kind of hard to ignore, but this idea that we now have alternative facts and fake news that have entered the day-to-day lexicon. And so as I'm doing my research, of course, I'm seeing a lot of trompe-l'oeil paintings, and we've all seen them, like the grapes and the goblets and all these incredible things, and like the little lemon with the peel, and you're like, wow, it looks so realistic, right? But I came across this one painting. I don't know if you guys know this. We don't know who the artist is, but you can tell that they paint really well. But it was really exciting for me to discover this painting because what's happening here is that, I don't know if you can see, but so the artist was able to capture the likeness of the sitter. Incredible, right? But there's a fly which is not on the turban, it's on the painting. And so there's 2 layers to the painting, like the portrait and then the trompe-l'oeil fly on the painting. And so the idea is that you want to let it tell the fly, okay, go away. And so the thing is that it got me thinking that the artist is telling us that painting art is meant to trick us into seeing something that isn't really there. And it's in the process of discovering this trick that we get to see and think differently. And so I couldn't help myself. I had to do something similar with a honeybee. And so the idea is that it's subtle. And so I have this in my imagination that the work is hanging on the wall, and then the person doesn't quite notice it at first, and then they realize, oh, wait, there's a bee there? Wait. And so that was the reference point. And you can see here another example of how the work is made. And so if you look at it from the front, it just looks like there's depth that isn't really there. And I think it's worth mentioning that for members of my community, for queer people, authenticity is so important. I mean, we learn that in order to be happy, we need to be truthful. So my relationship with truth is like this really important thing. And so I thought it would be fun to turn it on its head. And these two, you guys might be familiar with this, but these two images are AI generated. And so as I'm working on the project, I'm thinking how technology can affect our relationship with truth and the way we see the world. And when we lose faith in our institutions, when we no longer trust facts or science, there are real-world consequences. So I also want to share with you guys a little bit of why I use the corrugated in the work. But so what's happening, actually, a little background on how I kind of worked through the process. But like, I had this idea, actually funny, I was looking in Instagram, I was scrolling, and then I saw this like sculpture. It was like a bust, a head, it was in a box, and it got me thinking like, wait, what is it on the surface, or it's a head inside a box? I couldn't tell, and it got me thinking like how you can't tell what's real, what's not on social media, because one is a photograph, you're not really there. But then it got me thinking about that, like, oh, I want to work on a project that has to do with this idea of like, you're not really sure what you're looking at. And so the difficulty with that is that because it's a very expensive process to print on aluminum and mount on museum boxes, I was telling my framer my idea, and my framer was like, I don't really know. I don't understand what you're saying. And so, like, the way I solved that is that I figured I'd make a prototype. And so I made a prototype with corrugated, and then I made a box. I put the flower arrangement inside the box. I printed it, and then I did another prototype of what the artwork would look like. And so I brought it to my framer. But like in the process of doing that, I thought, wow, I love the lines. I love the little details of the corrugated. And in a sense, I'm keeping that as part of the finished artwork because I'm sharing like part of my process. It's sort of like revealing like how I make them. And the thing is that also because corrugated is a material that we're all really familiar with. I mean, like I'm always recycling it. Like especially the work is actually made post-lockdown. So like. The thing is that I was thinking a lot about corrugated. It's kind of hard not to. Like, it's always coming into our apartments. We're recycling it. And so I felt like it was a material that was very common and part of our lives. And I thought it would be interesting to try to transform it. This is the work in the gallery wall. And I did want to pause for a little bit before I wrap up. But like, you know, when I look at work, like I was telling you all earlier, like I look at, I think about something that's happening in my life and something that I see in culture. So like, the thing is that I'm looking at exhibitions and movies and what's happening in podcasts and listening to what other people are talking about, what artists are making, designers, working with flowers, working with truth. And there's this one podcast which I love. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but it's called The Last Archive with Jill Lepore. She's a historian. And the podcast is about the history of truth. And it got me really excited because I was thinking like, wow, that's what I'm thinking. And I know that a lot of us are thinking about this idea of truth and our relationship with truth, especially today. And there's this one quote that I wanted to read to you because I feel like it goes to the core of what I was thinking about when I was working on the project. The feeling that it's hard to know anything anymore. That happens every time a new technology of communication emerges. But the answer to a mess of lies can never be to doubt everything, because doubting it all means believing none of it and having nothing left to believe in. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hi, I only have a comment. I don't have a question. Your mind is very interesting to me, and I think it was so beautiful to see how you went from your inspiration to the process of getting the art out of your mind, and I was smiling for majority of what you were saying, and I just think it's beautiful to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me. I do pour my heart into my projects. So it's great to be able to connect that way.
And can I just say something too? Oh, because they need it on the.
Sorry, Brian, you have to wait.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one thing, that Daniel was just sort of scratching the surface of his thought process as he was going through this, and it's like, it's amazing how much more stuff is brought into to all of these artworks. Yeah.
Yeah, I did have to edit down.
And it's very nice of you to share, so much of your process. It's not actually something that most of us get to see regularly.
Yeah, and I think that because in part because it's very much part of like how I make my work, and I think that different artists do things differently, but it's just so wonderful to be able to tell you a little bit of background, because I'm not there when you're looking at the work, and I'm not present, so this is good.
Thank you.
I have like probably a dozen different questions for you, but I will try to keep it to one right now, unless you want to go out and have coffee at some point. As a comment, I love all the different ways your brain runs down all these different paths and different avenues, and it makes me feel very much about. I kind of want you to come back and give my talk next week, because it's the same kind of thing. There's so much to talk about, but I like that you also pull it down to where you don't have to go down all those avenues in order to appreciate the work. You can appreciate the work just for what it is. My question is that this stuff's gorgeous. It's really beautiful, and I wonder. Both of us are old enough now that we grew up in a time where beauty was considered sort of a real no-no in the art world.
No, for sure, yeah.
And I wonder how you came to deal with that. What brought you to be able to just make beautiful stuff?
That's such a great question, actually.
And I'd like to hear what you have to say.
So it really has so much to do with following my gut. For a long time, I was doing work that I felt like fit that sort of contemporary dialogue of what work is supposed to be like. And I just, it never really quite felt satisfying for me. And then I wasn't really showing work. And then I got to that point where I was thinking, well, if I'm not showing work, I'm gonna really just go there, I'm gonna make it exactly how I want it to look in my wall, and it will be just perfect to the way I envision it. And I happen to like it because it's pretty, right? And that actually turned out to be the thing that worked, So I think that I'm not saying that one has to make things pretty so that they work. But I think that there's a certain sensibility that is true to who I am, and that I feel like people are receptive to it because they kind of see that, And so, so I'm just following my gut, and it happens to work. So.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Yes.
Hello. I just want to say you and your work are very inspiring, and I had a question about what advice do you have to offer queer artists, especially in a time when our art, our bodies, our voices are so censored, and especially it could be taken even further, based on After Tonight?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think as an artist, you have a responsibility to engage, right? So like, there's like different roles that we play in culture. Like we are historians, we are entertainers, we are decorators. Like we are like so many of these things, right? And so like, I think that my advice is that you put your heart and soul into the projects, right? And then you engage with your community, and not just the queer community, but like the arts community, the New York community, and maybe even outside of New York, right? And so that in this engagement and this participation that you have, which is not just making work, but also being part of a nonprofit, or just these other things inform the work. And I think that keeping you in that kind of engagement, I think it's important. It informs your work, but keeps that connection.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. It was very interesting to learn like all the process that you went through for each project. One question that I have is how you know when to stop with a project, or do you think of an amount of images from the beginning, or how does that work for you?
That's a good question. So I developed I'm driven by my color palette a little bit, right? So like I kind of want my color palette to feel full, like I have the colors that I want, because I'm also thinking about the work, what it looks like hanging on the wall, right? So like I want a certain number of greens and yellows and blues, and then honestly I could go on forever, right? But like I do have these parameters of like, you know, like for example with Final Girls, it's like a particular decade, like, you know, like a particular film trope, and so that creates some limitations, right? But then also because the work is driven by not just like a gut feeling, but like a certain kind of like I feel like I feel like I'm looking for something, right? And then at some point I stop searching, and I feel like, oh, I get it. Like I know what it is that I'm like trying to do, and I feel like things are resolved. And so it's a feeling of like satisfaction, and then that's when I know the project ends. And then I also have a few deadlines.
Wow. Great. All right. Anyone from this side of the room?
I loved your presentation. The fascinating thing to me is how you are getting your inspiration. So you really know the artwork, what you are looking at. At every artwork, what you see, some idea comes out from your which is really relates to you. And that's what you're working on it. So the inspiration, what you are getting, this is really fascinating to me. And you're working in a special way, not just looking at it and understanding it. And by understanding it, and you are kind of showing it to us in your photography. It was just an excellent presentation.
I really appreciate the feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful. Anyone else? Last call. Now or never. Yes.
And your photographs are so beautiful. I mean, they're really just like the technical side of your photography is just, you know, on the whole other side of like your ideas is just magnificent.
Oh, thank you so much.
Prints are available for sale. Yeah. Okay, Daniel, thank you so much. It was perfect.
Thank you.